So in the episode right before this one, you learned about the 3 biggest mistakes that podcast hosts tend to make when interviewing guests that ultimately tank your listener engagement and that make your show forgettable. And you learned that when you remember that you're not there to serve your guest, but that your guest is there to serve your listener, everybody wins. Your listeners stay engaged, your guest gets the exposure that they're on your show to get in the first place, and you get the downloads. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, I strongly recommend going to listen to that because this episode is going to build on it. And I'm going to hand you my exact guest prep process to help you turn every interview that you create, not just into content, but content that connects and ultimately converts. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. It brings me no greater joy than when I get a message from a guest in my inbox with a screenshot saying, OMG, Courtney, look at my inbox. Look at these newsletter sign-up alerts. Look at these product payments. Like, I haven't done anything else recently. This all has to be from your podcast. This is literally messages like this that I get from guests, and they're always blown away by the engagement that I have on my show because they guest on other podcasts and they don't get that kind of engagement. And so I want the same for you. I want your guests to get that kind of result because then they're going to compare every other episode that they do on other podcasts to yours. You become the trendsetter. You become the standard. And that's when you as the host know that you did a good job of leading that conversation because your guest and your listeners got the value that they were there to get. So I'm going to teach you how to do this. But what I want you to understand is that this is a skill. This is not something you're going to master overnight. For me, this has come with a lot of practice, and it's something that I am still working every single interview on getting better at. I will tell you, though, that you certainly are not going to master this skill if you keep telling yourself, you know what? I'm just naturally good at conversation. I'm a good listener. I'm good at communicating. That may be true. Okay. But it's also true that if you don't prep for your episodes, then you are going to run the risk of your podcast blending in with your competition. Why? Because if you wind up asking your guest the exact same questions that they have answered on dozens of other podcasts, you're not creating anything unique. You're creating a rerun of content that doesn't actually serve your listener, nor does it make your podcast unique or distinct. So pay attention to what I'm about to share with you, because when you know how to prep the right way, you're not just going to be creating a podcast. You're going to be creating a conversation that people can't stop thinking about, that they can't stop talking about. You're going to be creating a conversation that comes up in conversation because it's going to be so relevant and so meaningful. But to do that, you have to develop the skill of leading an interview so that you can pull the kind of content out of your guest that is one of a kind, that is valuable to your audience. So if you're thinking right now, well, you know what, Courtney, I'm really busy and I don't have time to prep, then I will tell you right back to your face, yes, gladly, that you have no business podcasting. Not if you want a top binge-worthy show anyway that actually gives you an ROI. And I know that that might sound harsh, okay? Courtney of old would never have said that because I'd have been like, oh my gosh, I don't want to offend anybody. But at the end of the day, the reality is today's top podcasters spend hours or even days preparing for their guest interviews. Jordan Harbinger, who gets over 15 million downloads a month to his podcast, spends a minimum of 20 hours preparing for every interview that he does. Tim Ferriss spends a minimum of 2 to 4 hours, but sometimes up to 5 days, depending on the guest. Why? Because they know that powerful interviews don't happen by accident. So look, don't worry. I'm not saying you have to spend 20 hours prepping for every interview, okay? But if you are expecting meaningful results from your podcast, trust, authority, leads, growth without putting in any prep time, you're showing up as a hobbyist. You're not showing up as a podcast host. So no, you don't need 20 hours to 5 days to prep, but you do need their level of respect for the process. Because if you're not willing to invest the time to understand your guest, to learn about their background without you having to ask, to craft intentional questions that they haven't been asked before so that you can make the conversation relevant and unique for your listener, then you're just recording reruns of conversations that have happened dozens of times and hoping that your listener appreciates them. And that's not a strategy that's going to scale your show. So when it comes to prepping guest interviews, the goal here is not to have like a 10-page script or a list of like 15 interrogation questions outlined ahead of time, that you're reading off the paper without like giving the conversation room to breathe. No, it's to go in with a plan and a point of view, period. You want to have a clear angle. So long before you hit record, and even before you start researching your guest, the moment that they book on your show and okay, I've got XYZ guest coming on my show, I want you to ask yourself, what is the one idea that I want their episode to prove or to challenge or to explore? And what does my listener need to feel or understand by the end of that episode? And if I were to sit here and come up with any stories or beliefs or objections that my listener might have, or unique angles that might help get us there to that end goal, what would those things be? And then you're going to write no more than 5 guiding questions to help unlock that idea. 5 questions is a discipline. It keeps your episode focused. And so this is a skill. This is a muscle. Just like going to the gym and developing a muscle, we got to strengthen this muscle. Whatever you do, please do not, from this day forward, don't roll into an interview and hit record and say, so tell me about your background or some version of it. Or how did you get into this? No, start every episode with your hook. What is your most polarizing question? Ask it first. What do you think your listeners are going to be the most curious about? Start there. What is the biggest objection that you know that your listeners will have to whatever the guest is there to share on your show? Start there. Ask that first. Keep your audience's pain points front and center. This is going to be your filter or the lens through which you craft every question. So if you're talking to a mindset coach, but your audience is all brand new business owners trying to land their first 5 clients, your job is to connect the dots to help your listeners see how working on their mindset can help them land their clients. So don't just ask about mindset. Say, well, you know what? My listeners are typically new founders who are all building businesses for the first time. They're on a steep learning curve right now. And I'm curious to know, given your experience, what belief would you say is most likely to block someone in their very first year of business that would keep them from landing clients and generating revenue? Questions like that. Not just what is the mindset you need to grow a 6-figure business. Every question should be strategically designed to prompt the host with an answer that's going to give immediate, relevant value to your listener. And that starts with being clear on the specific pain points that your listener has. It's going to be very difficult to craft questions if you are not clear on the problems that your podcast solves for people. And the reality is some hosts will talk a lot. Maybe you'll get to all 5 questions. Maybe you won't. But having those 5 questions gives you a focus for the episode. And it also gives you enough in your preparation that were the guest to go in a little bit different direction, or were they to raise a point that you then want to double back on or go deeper into, it allows you that freedom. So I want you to remember the discipline of crafting 5 questions is not just to have focus, but it's also to have freedom. Because if you have a list of 15 questions and you're trying to sit there looking at it, you're not really tuned in and listening to what your guest is saying because you're thinking about the next question that you're going to ask. So the 5 questions gives you enough to go on. And on the flip side, it also gives you permission to not have to ask every question because you will have done your research. And as you're sitting there actively listening to your guest, you will know, when you know your listener, you will know the direction that you need to take that conversation next. So the very first thing that I do when I sit down to prepare a guest episode is I turn the search feature on in ChatGPT and I say, I am a journalist preparing an episode with so-and-so from whatever company they're with. Find interesting or little known facts about this person that might be relevant to an audience of blank, and you fill in your audience. So what ChatGPT can do is surface a lot of the stuff that you would have had to sit there going through pages and pages of Google, scouring the internet to learn more about their background. And it can help surface some initial interesting points of entry. Okay, so that kind of gives you a little bit of context there. Now with that, from that, you will take that into consideration, and then you're going to ask GPT for a list of previous interviews and links to them that they have done on other podcasts. And you're going to go listen to those. And you're going to listen to them. Now you can listen on 2x speed. I don't care how fast you listen, but listen and pay attention not just to what the guest says, but also what the host asks. Why? So that you don't ask the same questions. Now, you can listen to the guest answers as well, of course, to see, okay, what's the content that they're always talking about? Where do they light up? Where do they repeat themselves? Where do they kind of get vague or surface level, or maybe just the light goes out and they seem a little bored? What should the host have asked or doubled back on that you would have asked if you were in that seat to dig deeper on whatever that topic was that the guest was talking about? So you want to listen to both sides of the conversation. Now, I don't trust ChatGPT here because, ChatGPT is going to surface information and it's good and it's a great starting point. But at this point in my research process, I will also go do my own search on Apple, on Spotify. I will type that guest's name in. I will type it into Google. And what I'm looking for is additional podcast episodes or even YouTube videos that guest has done. Because what I want to know is what have they already talked about so that I can craft a conversation for my show that's different and that's unique. The next thing I like to do is if they're active on social media, go review their social media accounts. Figure out where they're the most active, and then look at their posts, watch their videos, read their content. What I want you to look for here is strong opinions. What are they saying that not everyone would agree with? Great interviews aren't all, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. I love that. I love what you said. You can say that as kind of like a segue into the next thing, but then you can object or, wait, tell me more about that. Or, why do you think that? Because I know a lot of people out there would think differently or they think the opposite. Tell me more about that. For example, you mentioned you don't believe in XYZ. What led you to that? Or, yeah, I appreciate that because that's a really bold take. Tell me, what's the moment that shifted that in your view? Invite nuance into the conversation. That's what makes interviews memorable. Have a little bit of sparring match with them. In fact, I love when a guest comes on my podcast and they're like full permission to go against anything and everything that I say, because I know that you are equally an expert here in this field. And I enjoy conversations where we debate and go back and forth a little bit. And it's like, not that I needed the permission, but it always feels nice for a guest to acknowledge that, because it's like, those are the conversations that are interesting. Those are the conversations that are memorable. So don't be afraid, even if your guest doesn't give you permission for that, or they don't say that, you're the host, you have the permission already, you don't need permission. Go there, invite that in. So what I do in social media is pull out key quotes that I think would be relevant to the hook for the episode. Guests love it when you quote them on air, because you can say, you know what, I saw a post that you posted recently where you said blah, 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 blah. And suddenly, that's elevating your rapport and that's elevating your credibility in their eyes, because they see that you did their research. You're not just like every other host out there who just kind of rolled into the interview, sat down and hit record. You actually took time to get to know them. And then if they have a podcast or if they have a YouTube channel of their own, I go and I listen to their episodes. I listen to the way they talk. I listen to the things that they say and the way that they say it. I listen to how they carry a conversation. If they have guest interviews, I listen to how they're in conversation. If they have solo interviews, I watch those and listen to those too. Not just one episode, but multiple. Same thing. I'm looking for key quotes here, because you can pull that in and make that relevant to your questions. You can make that relevant in your conversation with the guest. The other thing that I will do is I will look and see if they've written a book. If they have a book, I buy the book. If it's interesting to me, I'll actually read it. If I'm up against a time constraint, what I'll do is I'll skim the table of contents and I'll jump to relevant chapters, and I will review those chapters and just highlight key quotes that I can weave into my interview or form questions around. Again, looking for what's different, looking for stories that haven't made it into their interviews, scanning the intro to the book and the conclusion, because that'll give you a hint into why they do what they do. And then you can drop those little breadcrumbs from the book into your questions. And again, guests love this because it builds instant rapport. So I was reading in chapter 7 of your book that you said da 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 da, and here's the question I have for you. And they feel seen. So again, this elevates you as a host. It helps you get better conversations out of your guest. And it helps you get more engagement from your listeners, because they're going to be hooked because they haven't heard this stuff from this guest before. But in order to have this level of preparation, this does mean a few things. Number one, it means, yes, that you have to have your guest booked in advance. Number two, it means that you have to have time on your calendar ahead of that interview to prep. Not an hour before, not a day before, ideally a week before or more. And yes, this is going to mean that you need to have systems in place for your podcast workflows so that you're scheduling guests ahead of time. And if you need help with building systems around your podcast, my friend Joe Casabona is a genius with this, because without these systems, you are going to reach a point where it will be difficult to scale your podcast. So the key takeaway here is this. Preparing your guest interviews, yes, it helps you craft better questions. But those questions are the only way to guarantee that you are delivering an interview with this guest that they haven't done anywhere else. And therefore, you're creating content that your listener can't get anywhere else. But before I send you off to go prep for your next guest episode, here's the hard part. You're going to prep, then you have to let it go. Dean Nelson talks about this in his book too, which I mentioned in the last episode. I'll link to it in the notes here below as well. Yes, you need to be prepared. Yes, you need to do your research. Yes, you need to know your guest. You need to have an angle. But once the conversation starts, you have to be willing to let it unfold. That means trusting the moment and trusting yourself more than you trust your script. And if I'm being honest with you, this is a skill that has been a really tough one for me to learn, because I spend that time preparing and I type out my questions and I type out all the things, and it's almost like sunk cost fallacy where it's like, but I spent that time, I want to ask these questions. But at the end of the day, I know that me being present enough to follow the thread, even if it's not what I planned, might actually be the thing that serves you better. And when you remember that as the host, that's where the magic can start to happen for you. The unexpected stuff, the little jokes, the stuff your listener actually is going to remember, the side tangents, the rants. So yes, prepare. You need it. You need it in order to let the conversation unfold. Just don't grip so tightly that you miss the good stuff when it shows up. And to that, you might say, yeah, but Courtney, you just told me to spend hours preparing, and now you're saying prepare and then let it all go? Like, what's the point? Isn't that a waste? No, not even close, because the real waste is not preparing. And then freezing when the conversation takes a turn you didn't plan for, or worse, sticking to your script so tightly that you miss the one moment that could have made your episode unforgettable. Or even worse, asking the same questions that your guest has answered 30 times over. So prep isn't the thing you do and then throw away. Prep is the thing that gives you the power to pivot. And that preparation gives you the confidence to drop the script, to lead, not to follow, to create the kind of episode that makes your listener feel something. And if you're not doing that, you're not just wasting your time. You're wasting your guest's time, and you're wasting your listener's time. And they're not going to tell you that they're bored. They're just going to stop listening. So from here on out, you're going to prep like it matters, because it does. Now, before we wrap this up, I'm going to leave you with one secret ninja question that I ask every guest before they come on my show. And this question has led to some of the most insightful, relevant, emotionally charged conversations that actually create a great listening experience. The question is this. So I'm preparing for your episode. Before I jump into my research, tell me what's got you fired up right now about XYZ industry. For me, it's about the podcasting industry. And it can be fired up good or fired up bad. Hit reply, let me know when you have a minute. Sometimes I'll text them that question. Sometimes I email it. Either way, they will email you back a gold mine. They will text you back a voice note with something that you like, holy cow, you better be writing notes, because it's going to give you an insight into what they're really passionate about. And when you can tap into that passion, then you tap into emotion. And when you tap into emotion, you tap into connection. And that's what builds trust. That's what builds relevance. If you caught the episode on my podcast with Alban Brooke, the marketing director over at Buzzsprout, we did 2 interviews, and one of them was about video podcasting. That was not the episode that I prepared. But when he came back with, I just came to this conclusion literally 3 days ago about video podcasting, and I'm really excited to share it, I knew that I had to throw out every question I had prepared, because I knew that what I was going to get there would be his raw take, his real take, his emotional hot rant on the topic in real time that he had not yet shared anywhere else. And that would be extremely valuable to you. And when we recorded that, I literally sat on pins and needles. I could not wait for that episode to go live. And I want you to have the same feeling when you record your guest episodes, because that's the whole point. You got into podcasting because you love this. You love connecting with people. You love sharing your message. You love communicating in this way. And that is the exact feeling that I want you to have at the end of every interview. The way you get there is through preparation. So from here on out, you are not just researching or preparing just to research or prepare. You are researching and preparing how to make this episode serve your listener. And if you remember nothing else from anything that I've shared with you here today, it's that your job isn't to ask better questions. Your job is to ask different ones. That is the key to standing out. Because that is how you create conversations that make people say, dang, that was good. And if this was good, then I would love it if you would scroll down in your app, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen, tap the 5 stars. Bonus points when you leave a written review, because what that does is it lets other listeners know that this show is worth their time, that they are going to get real value when they spend their time listening here. And then don't go anywhere, because in the next episode, I am bringing on a guest who is going to show you what happens when you stop treating your podcast like a screen-only relationship and turn these virtual conversations that you're having with guests on your show and with listeners who listen to your show into real life connections, so that you can grow your network, build deeper trust, and create the kind of opportunities that just aren't going to happen in the DMs. That's all coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.